Hello everybody. Okay, so I did an earlier video today. Let me see if I can put this in a better way. I did an earlier video today. This is Babalao Awoy Fabemioni Chango Banya Moto, doing an English version of a video I did earlier today in Spanish for the Spanish IFA practitioners. Regarding the 16 major IFA signs or 16 major geomantic signs and its presence throughout various cultures and parts of the world. And even though I did a great presentation, the technology that I have didn't really help me because the laptop I have, which allows me to be able to use the technology to see what's on the screen and present it to you guys, the microphone or rather the fan on the laptop was making a lot of noise. So I thought, okay, I'm gonna have to go old school. We're gonna have to go through the phone and the back and front cameras to be able to show different things. The purpose of this video is to demonstrate very clearly that the geomantic system that we know as Ifa from Nigeria, or rather from Ifa from Nigeria, is not from Nigeria. Its origin is not Nigeria. To summarize, this is the third installment of this discussion. The first installment in Spanish essentially summarized, made the argument that basically that Ifa was a derived knowledge from another part of the world, in this case the Arab world, the Persian world, and later China and India. The second video brought additional information. The documentation that we have so far, because it's very hard to trace this on an anthropological and archaeological level, is a book in 1898 by Samuel Johnson called History of the Yorubas. Now, History of the Yorubas is the only written documentation with respect to this. It was written by a Christian priest. So because it was written by a Christian African priest, some people have tried to delegitimize the legitimacy of the book. In that book, in the third and fifth pages, Samuel Johnson detailed that he had interviews with the historians of the Alafin of Oyo, the Alafin being the king or the sovereign ruler of Oyo, of the Oyo Empire. And this sovereign ruler said that Ifa came, or the historians said that Ifa came from the east. They were asked, where does Ifa come from? They didn't say that Ifa came from Nigeria. They said Ifa comes from the east, and specified that the east for them was Mecca, the Saudi Arabia, the capital of Islam and the capital of Saudi Arabia. So basically, it establishes for the first time historically that the official Nigerian religious viewpoint is that this knowledge of the Ifa geomantic system comes from the Arabs, from the Muslims. Then we have a document in 2016 from the last Alafin, the Alafin who passed away. And in 2016, he writes down a document which is available on the internet. We put it on many of my posts, and I can share it to anybody who really wants the documentation. It's basically a small newsletter, let's call it that way. It's a newsletter or a letter, an official letter with his signature, essentially establishing that Ifa, through evolution and migration, was incorporated into the practices of the native Orisha cults, the native Orisha worships, and the stories, the prayers, the rituals, the songs, and everything that the Yorubas already had. And basically said that it was a knowledge that came of Arabic origin. So it establishes once again the same thing that the historians of the Alafin of Oyo in 1899 said. 100 years down the road, 100 and almost 20 years later, the Alafin of Oyo says the exact same thing, that it's of Arabic origin. And he specifies that this knowledge came to Yoruba land through Ota, from the area of Ota, because of the Alade of Alado. The Alade is a sovereign ruler. They had different titles like that. So the Alade is a smaller chief or a smaller king of a smaller kingdom inside the Yoruba land areas. And that the Alade of Alado taught the Alafin of Oyo, the larger imperial ruler, this Ifa knowledge, which was taught to them from Arabic origin, and this occurred in the 16th century. So we have, based on that writing, a frame of reference of time of when do we think that Ifa knowledge or the Ifa geomantic system arrives into the Yoruba land areas. Obviously, after 16th century, there's a mixture between the native cults, the stories, the eboses, a whole bunch of other information that is native to Yorubaland, and then that entire mixture, that syncretized, incorporated information between Arabic origin, geomantic knowledge, and the religious, more primitive cults of the Orishas in the Nigerian tradition, the Yorubaland tradition, get mixed together, and it forms what we know today as Ifa Orisha, or Esini Bile, or Isese Ifa, or whatever terminology you want to say. So the purpose of this video is to clarify to everyone, but particular to a group of people I like to call the Isese cosplayers. And these are Westerners who dress like Nigerians, talk like Nigerians, act like they're Nigerian Ifa Isese practitioners, but they don't have the linguistic knowledge of Yoruba. They don't have enough verses memorized. They don't have the ebo. They don't have the rituals. I mean, they're basically posers. In English, we call them wannabes or posers. And the term cosplayer comes from costume playing. It's a tradition that has come up in the United States for the last 20, 30 years of people who will dress up as famous comic book characters, Spider-Man, Superman, Batman, Star Wars figures, people from different shows. So people go to these conventions, these Comic-Cons or Marvel Cons or Sci-Fi Cons or Star Wars Cons, I like to call them that, basically Star Wars conventions, and they will dress up like their characters, and they act out the dressing up. They're pretending to be their characters, and that's called cosplaying. So in the same way that there's this tradition of cosplaying, there's also Isese cosplayers. These are people who claim to be Isese, but they're really not. What they're actually doing does not match the required knowledge or practice to actually be respected as an Isese believer. So my point is to use this video to prove to these Isese cosplayers and also to the general audience that Ifa knowledge is not from Nigeria, that Ifa was not created in Nigeria, that it had antecedents that are out of Africa and that we're going to trace here. So the first thing I want to talk about is some of these images that I'm going to show you here. Station I've found, and it's basically the anatomy of a geomantic figure. This is the European geomantic system. It's called the esoteric symbols of the system of the 16 great signs from European geomantic system. So for those that didn't know, Ifa knowledge, there is a version of it that is available on what do you call it? In Europe. Okay, so we're basically checking out that information. We have here obviously some shorthands of Ogbe, Yekun, Guda. So these are all the shorthand symbols, just so you guys have an idea of that. So we did, just so you know that this information is there, and it actually corresponds. The funny thing is, sorry for the light, because I didn't turn off the the light here, so it's flashing out the flash. It corresponds that the top, if you have an Odu, in this case a Trupong, right? It corresponds with what position does it speak about, head, chest, the stomach, or the feet. So they're actually a layout in European geomancy studies, geomantical studies or systems. They will tell you about the nature of the part of the body. So different geomantic systems, Ogbe, Oyekun, Iwori, Odi, etc., the different major signs will correspond in a different way to different parts of the body. Let's continue the conversation. The next one that I will showcase, let's see, is again another system of information. We have here the geomantic system, the 16 great signs from the Minyanga of Mali. So this is basically the people from Mali, and as you can see, they have their own symbols here on the left side. You see them over here on the right side too, and obviously the corresponding Odu, as we know them: Osa, Odrupon, Oche. This is Ika, Okana, Iroso, and so forth. So the Nigerians are not the only ones to have this system. The Europeans have it. The people of the Miyanka of Mali have it as well. In fact, the Mali people, for those that are Lukumi practitioners, when we say Oturamei, Obo ni papo keni papo Adifafun Imale, when we say Adifafun, what was prophesied for the Imale, for the Mali people, this is what we're talking about. We're talking about the people from this country. And they also had Ifa. And in Oturamei, funny enough, it talks about the Arab and Islamic influences in the Afro-Cuban tradition. And it says that the white man had Ifa before the black man. That doesn't necessarily mean that the white Europeans had it before the Africans, but it does mean that the lighter-skinned Arabs had Ifa before the Africans did, okay? That's what it's talking about. And we're seeing the proof of it right here. Let's go on to the next one. Here we have the Sisa Ifa divination system. It's the same Meiji signs, as you can see. And what's interesting is, even though the writing here says that the Yoruba or Nago Brotherhood, basically the Yoruba ethnicity, of Afa spread among the Ewe people, they didn't really need it. It says with the impressive documentation, Afa did not have to be imported. Okay, it says almost all the formal ritual incantations in Shisha Ifa are in Ewe, mixed with Ewe from the old Ewe and Aja. And the Afa stories include their god Yigbla, as the Aja Ewe god. Okay, so it's interesting that it also talks about a little bit here. Where was it? Because I remember I saw it somewhere in Fumeji stories. In Fumeji story, it says that this sign lived with Nyingla. So the question is, who had Ifa knowledge in the African context first, the Nigerians or the other people? Because in this particular case, the Ewe did not, their Fumeji talks about their god, Yigla. But in the Olodumare, or I'm sorry, in the Yoruban tradition, there's no mention of Jigla, and Jigla doesn't exist for the Nigerians. So how come there's a story in Fumeji, which is Ofumeji, in the Ewe tradition of Sisa Afa, that talks about a deity that doesn't exist on the other side? That proves to us that every culture took the geomantic 16 signs, which came from outside of Africa, and incorporated it into their own practices, and put their own stories, their own deities, their own rituals, their own songs into the mix. So each geomantic tradition, whether it be Sisa Ifa from the Ewe, or whether it be Fong Fa from the Benin people, the Fong, the Fa Agbasa from the Benin people, the Fong Arara. Every single one is compact and its own practice, because ultimately they're using imported geomantic knowledge, the 16 major signs and the compuestos, all the homoluos, all the mixture signs. They're using that information that comes from the outside and making up their own practice mixed in together. So there's been a lot of syncretism in the African tradition, because this knowledge obviously is not only Yoruba. We'll continue. We'll get there soon. Okay, this is going to be developing. Let's put it that way. So here we have the 16 great signs according to the Bamana system. Now the Bamana people also, I believe, exist in Mali. And it says the Bamana app, if you see, you have all the 16 signs, but they all have different names. Teremese, Nusa, Talike, Insa, Somana, Alhuatala. They have different names to the signs. So this is the great signs in the Bamana system. But the interesting thing is here in the bottom. It says the Bamana Arabs say the precise origin of geomancy is not truly known. Nevertheless, it is agreed that its place of origin is in the east. Once again, we have another culture calling and saying that it's in the east. It's not in Nigeria. It says it's to the east. Geomancy has been practiced since the remotest antiquity. Its area of diffusion is great. It is known in the Far East, in the East Indies, Malagasy, Africa, and South and North America. In Europe, it is taught in diverse universities such as that of Padu. So as you can see, the same 16 signs are seen by very many cultures. The Mali, the Ewe, the Bamana, the Yoruba. And we're going to continue. We're going to see much more. Here, it talks about the appearance of it in Africa arose, according to researchers, during the epoch of the settling of the great clans. Its introduction into our country, Mali, seems to be due to two masters from Kwasulumi, now Musa and now Burema. And they basically put a date of when? The 10th or 11th century. So at the very least in Mali, these geomantic signs were there from the 10th or 11th century. Remember that I said at the beginning, the Alafingo Yo said that Ifa came to Yorubaland throughout Ota in the 16th century. So it's impossible, and my apologies if you hear the machines and the neighbors, but it's impossible for a knowledge from Yorubaland that entered Yorubaland 16th century to have then retroactively taught the Bamana people, and the origin of it in the 10th or 11th century. This is proof that the Bamana people already had the information, these 16 signs, before the Yorubas had it in the 16th century. It continues here. These priests of geomantic divination didn't ever need to invoke any entities at the beginning of all sciences or divination. The Beledulu, or the Beledugu, didn't know of geomancy until much later, during the 15th or 16th century, okay, which is consistent with the Yorubaland knowledge. According to one version, geomancy arose in pharaonic Egypt, so some of them thought it came from Egypt. The Arabs, who always practiced it, called it Sarab el Faraumu, which means the imprint or making of impressions on the sand. The Belegudu give it the name Keni, sand, Bulgari, dust, or Lautru, the hole. And this comes from La Divination, La Geomancie dans le Belegudu, by Issa Baba Traoré. So this is information here that's interesting, because at least for the Bamana people, their roots are either pharaonic Egypt or previously the Arabs, who always practiced it. Okay, and we have a date here of when they think they got it, in the 10th or 11th century. Let's move on to the next image right here. The next image talks about Igbo Ifa. The Igbo are a people that exist in Nigeria in the eastern part of the country. They're not Yorubas, and they also have their own information, and they have their own mythological. They believe that there was a story of an Igbo lady who made accurate prophecies, and when she died, obviously she became a plant or a tree, and anybody who consulted the seeds of that tree could get the same accurate divination information. That's the what I call the mythology, which is interesting because we talk about in all the other Fa traditions, whether it be Yoruba land Ifa, whether it be Fong Fa, the Fagbasa, of a female deity, Badu or Igbaodu, of being the one that has the signs, the information. So it's a female energy in all of the cultures, in Igbo, in Yoruba land, and in Benin, Fong Fa, right? But here we have in the images, that's the Igbo have the same signs. They may have different names, but if you notice, Odi is the same. Odi is the same. Iwori is Ogeli. Oyekun is Akwu. Ogbe is Obi. Says close. Okala, Okana. Obala, Obara, So there's very similarity. Atukla is Otrupung. Aka is Ika. Ora is Osa. Ogunda is Iyite, which is a totally different name, but the Igbo have their own type of divination system. And it's all the same 16 signs. Let's continue. So it's basically the combinations here, okay? These are the Sigidi system. This is the Sigidi system of Malagasy. In Malagasy, in Mali you had the Bamana people, and now in another area called Malagasy, they have the Shigidi system also has the 16 major signs. The same exact divination system, 16 major signs, what we call the 16 Majis in Ifa, in Cuba and Nigeria. So just so you know, so many cultures that have had this system. It's not exclusive to Yoruba land. Well, let's continue. Now here's when things get real interesting. The 16 geomantic signs figures of traditional China. Now here we have the Chinese symbols here on the left, right? But when you see the right, we see the way that they actually mark it on the sand or on a table. If you notice, we have basically Ogbe right here. Okay? And we have Oyeku Meji, and we have Iwori Meji, and we have Odi Meji. But look how they designed it in different ways of writing it. All dots mean the ones are the dots, and the lines are the doubles. So if you have Iwori, it's a line and two dots and a line. And if you notice here, this is another way of writing it. Okay, so we have here, 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 and here. And it corresponds to Chinese names. Liu, Shui, Keu, Qian, Yu, Takuo, and then the meanings behind it. So what we notice is, let's stop here for a second and discuss this issue. If we know that the ancient Chinese have it, and the Chinese culture is thousands of years old than any of the African cultures. I mean, we know from history that the Yoruba cities were not united together under the immigrant, because he was a foreigner, Odudua, who came and brought, knowledge and, conquered and united all the Yoruba, kingdoms to provide a unity among the people that today call themselves the Yoruba. That didn't happen until 1350 after death. The Chinese Empire and the traditional China from back in the day existed thousands of years before this. So if the Chinese already had these markings, which correspond to the 16 major signs, they had Ifa before Nigeria had Ifa. By thousands of years. This page alone is proof enough that Ifa could have never come from the Nigerians, that the geomantic tradition of the 16 major signs and all the combination signs must have come from earlier cultures. The Nigerians obviously adopted it to their own traditions, to their own land, and they had affixed their own songs, their own rituals, their own deities, just like the Igbo did, just like the Bamana did, just like the Shigidi did, just like all the other cultures did. The Ewe, the Fong, the Edo, the Igala. All of these cultures did the same, but that doesn't mean they're the origin. It's impossible that Nigeria could have been the origin if thousands of years before the Chinese had it. Take a look over here. So we have the traditional Chinese signs, and here we have the 16 measures, the remaining measures, and as you can see, it follows the same pattern. Wherever there's doubles, it's broken lines or lines over there, and one long line, or three long lines and a dot. And you can see for yourself the way it breaks down. Okay, let's continue. So now we have here the 16 great signs according to the European system. I am of the belief that the European system was one of the last ones, one of the last diasporas. I believe that the Muslims were responsible for populating Europe with this system, for teaching it to Europeans so that they would have their own European geomantic system. And I believe that the Muslims are also responsible for North African penetration and ultimately reaching the Gulf of Benin and Dahomey and Yorubaland areas, okay? But as you can see, the Europeans have their own 16 sign names: Fortuna Mayor, Fortuna Minor, Laetitia, Tristitia, Cauda Draconis, Caput Draconis, and so forth and so forth. This is not something that was taught by the Yorubas to the Europeans. Let's be real. There was no contact between Europe and Yorubaland before the British came in 1850 to conquer there. So let's be a little bit more real and more logical. So here we have a shorthand. The British, or rather the Europeans, had their own way of describing Ogbe, Oyekun, Ogunda, Osalete. As you can see, the symbols, these are shorthand symbols, okay? So instead of having to mark them double, they just with one hand, real quick symbol, represents Ogbe, Oyekun, Ogunda, Osa, Irete, Otura, Aklan is Okana, Abla is Obara, Ika is Ka, Otrukpen is Otrupong, Fu is Ofung, She is Ochemeyi, Wenle is Iwori, Wenle is Owani, Owani, Loso is Iroso, Woli is Iwori, and Di is Odi. There you go. The same 16 signs, but from Europe. And one guy who used to use it very much, it was largely used by Francis Warren in his important geomantic works. This is the type of work, this is the shorthand that he would use. Europeans used to use this knowledge way before any Nigerian in 1980 came over to the Americas or to Cuba to talk about Nigerian Isesefa. They were already using the 16 major signs in their own way. Now here's where we get to the bottom of how Europe got it. If you notice on the top, what does it say over here? It says same definitions of Europe, meaning the Arabic tradition, the definitions of the meaning of the signs right here in the middle are the same definitions as in Europe. And when you come back and you look at the signs, the figures, Tariq is Ogbe, Jama is Oyekun, Ijitima is Iwori, Tikaf is Odi, Nasra Karija is Iroso. And here you got this is the way they do it. They don't do lines, they just do the dots. But the dots correspond to Iwori, Ogbe, Oyekun, Iwori, Odi, Iroso, Owani, Obara, Okana. That's the Arab system. Now, obviously, where do you guys think the Arabs got it from? It's very logical. And we're going to see that in the next page. This is basically the remaining Mejis, Ogunda all the way to Ofung, okay? This is the Arabic system of 16 major signs. Now, in terms of the origin, they talk about a mythological origin where there was an angel Gabriel, who first appeared before Idris, the Arabic name for Hermes, Trismegistus, and he's the one who taught it. And, there's this whole story about how Idris was given the information by the angel Gabriel, so it was divine knowledge, etc., etc., etc. This is the 16 major sign, the origin of the 16 great signs according to Islamic sources. But the interesting thing about it is, when we start studying that, in this story, it was told that Gabriel said unto him, go to the Indian Tumtum and his people, meaning the Indian people, the people of India, and teach them the science. So from this, Hermes passes on the tradition to the elusive Tumtum. And Sumbul even claims that Tumtum's geomancy was written in the language of the inhabitants of India, meaning this was taught. Now the interesting is, Halaf al-Barbari was next in the Arabic chain of traditional descent. He traveled to India to study geomancy, okay, where he copied Tumtum's text into Arabic. Abu Abdallah Muhammad al-Sanati drew on al-Babari's work in turning to produce one of the more complete geomancies of his time. Although al-Sanati dates are not known, it is suspected that he lived during the 12th or 13th century. So, hello, we got another mention of knowledge of the Arabs having geomantic 16 sign knowledge in the 12th and 13th century. And where do they get their knowledge from? What do we say right here? India. We have a reference to Tumtum, to India again. The Yorubans will say that Ifa comes from the east, from Mecca and the Arab world, which is the Arabic people, who had it in the 12th or 13th centuries. The Yorubans had it in the 16th century. And where do the Arabic people say they got it from? India. We're getting close to the source, I think. Let's continue. So now we have other roots. It talks about the inhabitants of India there. There's another storyline here where basically all this was possibly originated there. In the book Islamic Geomancy and a 13th century divination device, They write, it is not outside the realm of possibility that some North African people did in fact develop such a system of divination as geomancy. But on the other hand, the Maghreb might be a reasonable area to which to attribute the development of an art whose origin had become obscure by the time it was committed to writing, and which may in fact have originated in the pre-Islamic Near East of India. Okay, so what we have here, it's interesting because it talks about here, one second, my friends. Okay, my apologies, people. I had an interruption here with the kids. I have a lot of kids now. So, as we were investigating, so it might have in fact have originated in the pre-Islamic Near East of India. And the interesting thing is in the bottom, it says, geomancy traveled with the Arab migrations to various parts of the African continent. The first Arab expansion reached North Africa and the island of Madagascar. In Madagascar, there's this system of divination called shigidi, a blend of Arab influences and local folklore. The same thing that happened in Yorubaland, a blend of Arab origin, meaning the geomantic system, and local folklore. The stories, the rituals, the songs, the orishas. The second expansion went south around the coast of North Africa and across the Sahara Desert toward the Gulf of Guinea. And this comes from Bernard Mopal, okay? Bernard Mopal says, in contribution à l'étude de l'origine musulmane of geomancy. My apologies once again. I had children coming outside and they want to come outside to play. No, the day's rainy. They can't come outside. So, as we were talking here, in the contribution à l'étude de l'origine musulmane de la geomancie, I hope I'm pronouncing it correct in as best French as I can. It basically talks about basically what we were talking about this information here of the origins of Islamic geomancy and its roots ultimately where? In India. So, and this is, I'm not making this up. This is in books already. Now, the interesting here in the next image is, this is the 16 great signs where? In the Hebrew tradition. Bait HaSobah, Shikub, Kehillah, Deresh, Shefel Rosh, Nishorosh. This is Hebrew. The Jews already also had Ifa. The Jews and the Muslims, which are cultures that have existed way before the Nigerian Yoruba societies had organized under Oduduwa in the 13th century. Before all that, they already had the 60 major signs. The Chinese, who also are a culture that's way before the Yorubas, already had it. So how can people explain to me that Nigeria was the origin and the fountain of Ifa, when the Hebrews, the Muslims, and the Chinese had these geomantic systems with their own names? I think it's pretty much destroyed. That theory is completely destroyed. What we can say is, just exactly like the Alafingo said that in the 16th century, Ifa was accepted into the Orisha pantheon, and that it incorporated the stories, the songs, the folklore, the rituals, the offerings, the cultural ideas of the Yoruba, the philosophy, was incorporated into the geomantic system. But the geomantic system itself is not part of a creation of Nigeria. Nigerian is not the origin and the fountain of that. Okay, we're going to get to that. Let's continue the discussion. So as we go along, we turn around. We have the geomantic system here, and I think that's the last one. Okay, I think I already did everything. So let's get discussion with you guys. So, what can we gather from this video? First things first, let's discard the idea that the Nigerians are the founders and the origin of Ifa. That is a romantic notion. That is an Afrocentric fallacy, an Afrocentric fantasy. A lot of Afro-Cubans, a lot of African practitioners trying to search for the roots of their life or identity. You know, they engage and they peddle in this fantasy that all knowledge comes from Africa. And that's not true. Primitive man came up from Africa. But primitive man did not have the resources nor the time to actually invest in the development of a complex geomantic system with all the eboses, all the akoche, all the prayers, all the stories, all the songs, all the verses. There's no way that primitive man from Africa would have been able to do that. Primitive man would have been concerned with subsistence, hunting and gathering, and later with the development of basic irrigation, you had the development of civilization. Once there was enough food cultivated through agriculture, then some people could dedicate themselves to other pursuits in society. They didn't all have to be hunters. They didn't all have to be gatherers. They didn't all have to be farmers. So they could focus on other things. Without farming, you really can't have the development of any advanced society. So which were the first advanced societies? The Indians. Hinduism is the first organized religion, the largest mass organized religion, the most ancient one, over 5,000 years before Christ, is Hinduism. And we have that the traditional Chinese had their own system of divination of the 16 major signs. My belief is that this knowledge either began in India, and this is what if you saw the writings, the Muslims believe the same. This began in India, was given to the Chinese, which right are on top of India, and then the Indians and the Chinese, through commerce with the closer nations of Persia, which is modern day Iran, and of the Mesopotamia, which is modern day Iraq. That's the conduit to the Arab world. In the Arab world, the Muslims and the Arabs get this knowledge, make it a part of their own tradition. They develop their own esoteric Muslim traditions and own esoteric Jewish tradition, Hebrew traditions, using the 16 major geomantic signs, the same measures. And it's there, from that point, that inflection point, where some Muslims, through the conquest of Europe and through the Roman Empire, through all those periods, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, conquer Spain, conquer France, conquer a whole bunch of long nations, during the historical period. And they bring, through the cultural and economic flows and migrations from the Middle East all the way to Europe, this knowledge, where Europe develops its own European geomantic system of the 16 signs. The same group of people, the same Muslims, go downward into the north of Africa, into the Maghreb, and later lower into Togo, Ghana, Benin, and Yorubaland, and teach those primitive people, those cultures, those cities, the information of the 16 major geomantic signs. That's my theory of how Ifa geomantic system arrived to Nigeria, where it's not the origin of Nigeria, the origin is in India, and goes down toward the Arab world to the Muslims, and through the Muslims to the Nigerians. Not only is it my theory, not only is it thought of in all the writings I showed, it's also the official position of the Alafin Oyo, who passed away, who said that in the 16th century, this geomantic knowledge of Arab origin was brought to the Nigerians, or to the Yoruba, in the 16th century. And in case people don't believe me, I'm going to make a pause here. I'm going to look for that document for you guys. Okay, guys, I got you the proof. So here we go. We have in this writing, let's see if I can go back a little bit. At the primordial times, this is, by the way, before I start talking about this writing, let's do this over here so you can actually see it. Okay, I'm going to raise it up for you guys a little bit. And we can see that this is an official writing, Ikubaba Yeye Alafin Oyo, with his address, Alafin Oyo State, the Cult, Volume 180, 16, reference number, dated August 1st, 2016. And at the bottom of it, it has his signature, Oba Dr. Lamidi Olayiwola Adejimi, the Alafin of Oyo and permanent chairman of Oyo State Council of Obas and Chief. With his signature, this is him. His name is Iku Baba Yeye, that's his religious name. And in this writing, he talks about the roots of Ifa, okay? And it says right here, at the primordial time, these advisors used their Adasha divination system, pieces of ivory, nuts and seeds, later introduced the cowrie shells known as the Owo Eyo Rendilogun, 16 cowries divination system being used today. Throughout the evolution and migration, the Ifa divination system of drawing marks on the sand or camwood with Arabic origin, dun dun dun, incorporated into their stories and systems various tales, plays, and aspects, and religious structures and functions of the Yoruba Orisha mythology, as the Itan stories, complex songs, histories, and other cultural concepts which make up the Yoruba race. And he actually shows an example in one of the Ifa verses of Nigeria of Okanran wondering. It actually talks about the Muslims, which Muslims used to call Oke Arafa. So there's a reference even to the Muslims in that verse over here from Okanran wondering. But the important thing is here, this paragraph. Are you ready? The new divination system called Ifa entered through the town of Ota to the Oba Alade from Alado, the first Yoruba king to receive beaded crown from the Alafin, who introduced Ifa to the Alafin. Ifa divination was properly accepted among the Orisha pantheon of the Yorubas by the Alafin of Inran in the 16th century. Till today, the Alafin continues to maintain the ancient Orisha tradition, and Adasha system has been inherited from a sister for the beginning of inception. But the important thing is, the Ifa divination system was accepted when? Tan tan tan, in the 16th century. Fingo yo, not just your regular guy walking around on the street in Ilefe or yo. The Alafin Oyo himself saying, Ifa entered through the town of Ota to the Oba Alade from Alado, And he introduced it to the Alafin overview in the 16th century. Not only any Alafin, he mentions the name of the Alafin in question, Alafin of Finran. How much more proof do we need? The Nigerians themselves accept that this is knowledge that didn't come from, that it was incorporated to them. They accept that their cults, Yemaya, Chango, Obatala, Oranfe, Ogun, Eshu, Elegba, all those are orishas and cults and traditions that are theirs. They're native to them. We agree. But the Ifa divination system, with all its wealth of information and wealth of magic and esoteric knowledge, is not theirs. We have seen that the Hebrews have it. We have seen that the Muslims have it. We have seen that the Chinese have it. We have seen that the Europeans have it. We have seen that at least 7 or 8 other ethnicities in Africa have it, and there's no proof who got it first in Africa. We do know, however, that the Nigerians didn't have it first, because Nigeria, the Yoruba people, did not constitute themselves as an organized people until the 13th century. And already in the 11th and 12th century, the Arabs have this knowledge. And before them, the Chinese. And the Arabs say, where does it come from? In the official Arab origin stories, they say India. India, China, India, China. Persia and Mesopotamia, Arab world, and from the Arab world toward Europe and to Africa on the bottom. And the ultimate, or the last chain in that long chain of peoples and cultures and civilizations who received the 16 major signs, the last chains of diasporas, because all of these are diasporas. The founders are the Indians. All the other ones are diaspora. That large diasporic chain ends with slavery, falling into Cuba, and from Cuba, diasporically exploding into Venezuela, to Panama, to Mexico, to Puerto Rico, República Dominicana, Peru, Colombia, Chile, Argentina, Brazil, and everywhere else where there's been Ifa practitioners today. But it is a lie to say the Nigerians were the ones who developed Ifa. And because the Nigerians didn't develop Ifa, now that we've kind of pretty much proved it, I think it's beyond a shadow of a doubt. Even though I'm going to be doing more research, because I've gotten at least a good 10 other geomantic history books, where I'm going to be investigating to get more knowledge, more delicious morsels for you guys. Beyond that, I think we have to accept that if Isese Ifa of Nigerian tradition is not the origin and the foundation, la fuente, el origen y fuente, if it's not the foundation, then all the other Afa, Ifa, Fa, Iha, and other names for this geomantic system of the 16 major signs, all the other traditions don't have to follow the Yoruba example as some kind of primordial, original, and correct example. It's just one in a mix of 12, 13, 14, maybe even 15 different other great civilizations and ethnicities that practiced it. The Yorubans simply have to get along with everybody else and respect everybody else's tradition. It is not necessary to do things with verses. It is not necessary to do things with the Boriru from Nigeria. It is not necessary to sing songs in Yoruba's names or use Yoruba titles for this, because it's not theirs. They received it just like anybody else. And that's the purpose of explaining things in this video. Everybody, see you guys later. We'll be discussing this further. Iboru Boya, Ibocheche.